Hello, Welsh Forest Focus. No match for Nottingham Forest this weekend, but lots to talk about and a chance to take stock after 4 games with Nuno in charge. Joining me to take on that challenge today is BBC Radio Nottingham sports presenter David Jackson, returning to the show. David, good morning. Are you well?
Yes, morning. Very well. Love what you've done with the new place. Very nice. Happy to be here.
Good to have you back with us. Good to have the kids back at school so we can do this. So, yeah.
And also, nice to be here when we're not talking after a big, heavy defeat. I mean, I know it was a draw with Blackpool, but at least that is put to bed now after the last few times last season.
Yeah, you were the Jonah. But yeah, it's good. I won't ask you on for the replay just in case, because I'm a bit worried about that. But yeah. What do you make on Nuno so far then? I'll ask you about media-wise, but just as a manager and what we've seen from him early days.
I think it's been decent. You know, you'd have to say the Bournemouth game was just a bit of a write-off because of the ludicrous sending off of Willy Bolly. So you can't criticise much that happened after that. I mean, defensively, they'd question, obviously, the goals they conceded. But I thought they looked okay in that game, and they've gone and beaten Newcastle, scored 3 great goals and just matched them. And then they've beaten Manchester United. I thought it was interesting that there was so much talk after both of those games nationally about how poor Newcastle were and about how poor Manchester United were. Actually, and that's true to an extent. Certainly, I was very surprised by Manchester United, who, you know, Forest have not got close to in all the games since returning to the Premier League. And I did think United were really poor. But Forest just exploited that expertly, I thought, and found the space that United were quite painfully, obviously leaving, exploited it and got their 2 goals. And even having been pegged back to 1-1, which could have been a really dangerous time, actually just Ryan Yates run 70 yards and the confidence in the team to go and try and win it, I thought was really telling. And I think what he's done is injected a bit of confidence in the team to go and express themselves and maybe just let the shackles off a little bit, just, you know, let go of the leash, let them go a little bit, which is similar in a way to what Steve Cooper did when he took over from Chris Hughton, when felt like they were just being held back all the time. And I remember Ryan Yates saying early on under the Steve Cooper era that he'd just been told to play 10 yards further forward and everything just pushed further forward. I thought when we saw straight from kickoff in the Bournemouth game, there was Origi, Wood, Elanga and Gibbs-White all just went straight away into a high press right from kickoff. And I thought, wow, okay, this is going to be that, you know, they're not just going to sit back and try and nick one. They're going for it. And I thought that was really, really telling. And so, yeah, you know, the draw with Blackpool, FA Cup, these things happen. There was, I'm sure we'll get into details of that game, and yeah, far from ideal. But I think overall, you'd have to say after the run of form Forest were on before, they've won 2 out of their first 4 games. Should have beaten Blackpool, and who knows what would have happened in the other game had they not had Bolly ridiculously sent off.
It's interesting what you say about Cooper there, because obviously he got a reputation for being defensive by the end. But early doors, like in the Championship, we were ripping teams apart with Brennan and Jed and Lewis Graben and Joe Lolly. Forget about, there's some fluid play. And early last season as well in the Premier League, they really tried to do it with Lingard and Gibbs-White and Johnson. And then even at the start of this season with the new signings, they went to 4-2-3-1 and it didn't work. And that was probably ultimately, I think, what started to unravel for Cooper. I mean, could you feel it when you're there at games and in and around the camp as you guys are, that the team went a bit into their shell and retreated, and did it feel like it was just unraveling at the end a bit and they'd lost their way?
I think there's an inevitability, I think, about when a manager's been in charge for a bit, because he knows all the players' weaknesses as well as their strengths. I think when you first go into a job, you can just say to players, go for it a bit, express yourself, show me what you're capable of. When you've been there for a year, 2 years, you know the strengths, you know the weaknesses. The players also know, you know, Cooper's tried players in certain positions and then it's not worked, so he doesn't want to try it again. Tried formations and it's not worked, so he thinks, well, that doesn't work with this bunch of players. But a new manager can come in and almost just do that again, and it can work because the players just feel like, oh, they've got a new manager to try and impress. So I guess in some ways it sort of felt inevitable at the end. It didn't feel like it could have carried on the way it was going for for much longer under Steve Cooper, did it? Which was really unfortunate because he'd been brilliant and all the rest of it, and he was great. But it just felt by the end, perhaps partly because of the results. I think I remember seeing the team sheet for the game away at Wolves, and he understandably left out a lot of players who'd been dreadful in that game at Fulham. But you think, well, if you're now picking a team that doesn't include Sangare, a £30 million signing in the summer, that doesn't include Origi, who'd be an expensive player in terms of wages, doesn't include a lot of these high-profile summer signings. In terms of that relationship with the board, you've kind of then got to win games, because from the board's point of view, they would look at it and say, right, you're not winning, but you're not playing the players that I've just spent all this money on. So why not? If he's not picking those and then they go and win those matches, they have to say, okay, you're winning games, whatever. And also that says to those players that aren't in the team, okay, well, I'm going to have to just knuckle down and try and break my way into the team. But if those multi-million-pound players are on the bench or not involved at all, then it can just start to get a little bit problematic behind the scenes, I think. So probably by the end, when they then didn't beat Wolves and didn't beat Spurs after that, you sort of thought, as promising as those performances were, as sort of energetic as those performances were, it kind of felt like it couldn't really go on much longer, I suppose, really. And sometimes you get a new manager in, and he's another young manager, somebody with a proven track record of not only getting into the Premier League but moving on to that next stage. Then you can see why the board were tempted by Nuno. Might not be the name that some had talked about before that, with like Lopetegui and people like that. But look at his track record, and you can see why they were tempted by him. So yeah, I think it's it kind of had that feel by the end that it couldn't go on. And also, I don't think it helps anybody, where you always felt, even if they'd got up to sort of 13th, 14th, if they lose a couple, then all the talk around the club starts to become about Steve Cooper's future again. And yeah, you don't want that kind of going on forever, really.
Yeah, I think he did the right thing at Wolves, because you couldn't pick Sangare or Dominguez or Aina, really, because they were that bad. But then you back yourself into a cul-de-sac, and you probably need another 5 games after that to reintegrate them. And I don't think he was ever going to get it. So it probably was, the writing was on the wall, unfortunately. So, I think he did a great job. But every manager has a cycle, and probably in a couple of years we might be talking about Nuno in this way, because that's modern football. But one other thing
I absolutely wouldn't question the decision to leave those players out after how poor they've been at Fulham. They were pedestrian and awful, and just got, Fulham just wiped the floor with them. So you can't. I'm not questioning that team selection for the Wolves game. I'm just saying that in a sort of bigger picture kind of sense, if you start picking a team that doesn't involve your big summer signings that the board have just spent a load of money on, then you have to win matches, regardless of how poor they've kind of been before. And 100%, you can completely understand Steve Cooper's team selection for that game. But just when I saw it, I thought, you need to win this, and they didn't. And they'd given him lots and lots of time, a few times, and every time. That's the other thing with him, with Steve Cooper. He'd proved in the past that he could dig a team out of that. He'd done it once at the start of last season, did it again at the end, and managed to keep them up. So he's got this incredible ability to motivate a team and also to find a way to win matches. And he's proved that he's done that in the Premier League. So his stock is incredibly high, and I've got no doubt that he'll walk into a Premier League job as soon as he wants to, and one becomes available that tempts him. So he's absolutely brilliant. But it's a certain moment sometimes in football management, and that was his time, unfortunately.
No, I think you're right. I agree. Let's do something very non-BBC and have a plug for our sponsors, as ever, the Trent Navigation. So Blackpool v Forest is shown on TV, which means it's shown at the Nav next Wednesday, 7:45 kickoff. You can book a table now and watch the game there. And there are a selection of very fine curries that I've sampled myself for £8.50 on sale. So book a table and watch the game at the Nav. Putting you on the spot with all the big questions now, David. What's your curry of choice?
Any. I just eat, except I remember somebody once said, "Oh, have a fowl." No, don't ever have a fowl. That's just ludicrous. But yeah,
I can't eat anything spicy. No. We did share a very fine dinner together, I remember, at the
We
Trent
did.
Bridge a few
We
years
did. That was
ago
very
with
nice,
Mrs. Jackson and Mrs. Davies. Yeah, very pleasant food, but not too spicy. So, yeah, I was expecting a cultured answer after you enjoyed such fine dining there, not just any. Let's go back to Cooper. No, well, not Cooper, but Cooper versus Nuno in terms of media. Obviously, Cooper said all the right things, and I think he totally believed it around Nottingham and Forest and what the club is. Nuno seems to have set off on the same foot and looked very assured in interviews. What have you made of him from speaking to him or listening to Colin speak to him thus far?
Yeah, I think he's made a lot of reference to the fans in interviews, both pre-match and post-match. He's obviously very aware of the impact that the Forest fans have had and can have and continue to have under him now. So he's made reference to that a lot and talked a lot about the atmosphere and how great it is. He's laid out a few times already early on in his time that he said, for instance, in his interview with Colin last week, when Colin asked him about whether they might look to sign new players in January, and he said, "Look, I'm going to tell you now, I will never speak about players that aren't my players." Now, Colin hadn't asked him about a specific player, but I think his point was, I'll talk about the players that I've got. I'm not going to speculate about new signings. That's my rules. That's kind of where we are. So I think what I take read into that is that he's just laying his rules down at the moment, if you like. He's kind of saying, look, this is who I am. This is what I'm going to do. I don't think he's particularly bothered about establishing a big relationship with the media, a close relationship with the media. He'll come out, he'll answer the questions, and he'll do it well. And he'll tell you what he thinks. And he was very open after the Bournemouth game, for instance, with his views on the sending off of Bolly and on VAR on that. And we've been told before he doesn't like to talk about VAR, but I thought he's very open and honest in his verdict on the referee's decision there and how VAR should be allowed to intervene in those instances. And I thought he's been very honest about the goals they've conceded and talked about what's been right about the goals they've scored. So he's been very open and answered all the questions, absolutely no problem. And it's still very early days. So maybe that will change over the years. Maybe he will decide he wants to kind of grow more of a closer working relationship with the media. But from what I gather from his time at Wolves, that's not really his game. And that's not in any way a criticism of him. Some managers do like to do that. Some managers like to get completely integrated into the media and will be phoning journalists up themselves with stories to get them published. Others just like to have that distance and just say, look, this is a working relationship. I need to get my message across, but I'm not going to join in with the media's game and start answering any of your questions that the media want me to answer because I've got my rules. And that's absolutely fine as well. But it strikes me with Nuno that he is going to answer the questions he's given, but he's got his rules on what he is and isn't going to talk about. And so it's going to be different to Steve Cooper, but any manager would be. I think the way Steve Cooper talked to the fans via the media was like something I haven't really seen before. And he had an incredible turn of phrase as well with some things, when he said it in an interview on Radio Nottingham, which then I know made it into a big Forza Garibaldi banner, this place oozes football soul, and he just dropped it into an interview. And I just thought, that you must have thought of that before the interview. You can't just reel off a phrase like that. So he had a way of dropping things in like that just I think made supporters love him more than they did just for the football that they were seeing on the pitch. So I think probably don't expect stuff like that, but he is very aware of the fans and has talked about them. So I see no reason why, as they continue to play decent football and climb up the table, then I think he'll have a good relationship with fans. It just might be inevitably going to be slightly different, I suppose, to when Steve Cooper was in charge.
Yeah, and without getting too inside baseball, because people probably aren't too bothered about interview techniques and everything, I suppose you just want to know where you stand, don't you? Because you don't want to think, oh, this guy will have a laugh and a joke with you, and it turns out he won't. So if you know the parameters of an interview and the person, then you're probably going to get on fine with them, aren't you, I think?
Absolutely. I mean, and there are all the managers very, very different. I remember going right back to Paul Hart, for instance. You knew with Paul Hart, it's showing my age now, isn't it? But when I used to go down and interview Paul Hart, you knew that if you talked about the young players in the squad at the time, I know Gareth Williams, Andy Reid at the time, and all those kind of players, Michael Dawson and all that, he was great. You knew that he would give you fantastic answers on that. If you started talking to him about injuries, he'd kind of close up a little bit. If you were critical of goals they'd conceded, he didn't give you a lot on that. He didn't, but you knew there were certain things that he would prefer to talk about. And more recently at Notts County, Luke Williams, if you talk to him about coaching techniques, he'll just talk all day. He's fantastic. If you try to talk to him about something non-football, not interested. Other managers love to talk about things that aren't football and to get to talk about something different and just give a bit more of themselves. So yeah, they're all different, and you kind of feel your way and you find your way with each other, and that relationship becomes what that relationship is, and that's different with every journalist and every manager. But yeah, you just, like you said, you feel your way, you work out how that's going to work, and that's just the job, I suppose.
Has anything surprised you football-wise around him, particularly team selection? I mentioned to you before, like bringing in Montiel when Williams was playing well, and especially Mangala, who I thought, and probably still do think, is perfect for the way Nuno's Wolves team played, and he hasn't really had a kick yet. So has anything like that shocked you or surprised you thus far?
Well, I knew he'd want to play wing backs. I think it's interesting that he's not playing. It hasn't so much been a back three last time, was it? But you'd see Yates or Danilo drop in to sort of make it a fake back three, if you like. So he's kind of got four defenders, but the fullbacks are basically wing backs, and the midfielder drops in at times to play that very, very deep role, which I quite liked, I think. I mean, Montiel's an interesting one, isn't he? I guess it depends what Nuno thinks is Montiel's maximum ability. And to be fair, he's set up 2 goals in the last 2 games. And what he's wanting from him. Nico Williams is interesting, because I think Nico Williams did really well when he came in. You can see the work that he's been doing with Alan Tate defensively, because I thought when he first got into the first team, having signed last summer for 17 million, we thought, great, but then he was playing in a back 4 early on, wasn't he, Nico Williams, and got a bit caught out in that right back position. But when he's moved further forward and they played wing backs, I thought he was a lot more effective. And Montiel sort of strikes me as the same, really. Defensively, we still see errors. I mean, look at the goal the first goal they conceded against Blackpool. He's just headed it straight to a Blackpool player. Richardson had just headed it in easily from 6 yards out. So there are problems at that end, I suppose, with him, or there have been. But going forward, he's shown he's a good crosser of the ball, very aware of where other players are, and has set up Dominguez for 2 goals. So I don't know whether it's a massive surprise to see him in. I suppose if a new manager's in, he's going to look through his squad and say, well, here's a guy who won the World Cup with Argentina, and know what he's capable of. So let's see how he fits in. Mangala, yeah, I mean, he's had a few options, hasn't he, in midfield, and when they've needed to battle, you can understand why Yates would go in. I'm sure Mangala will get back in at some point, and if he picks up the form again that he was showing early on in the season, then he's a very tidy player. And as you know, we saw him get up and score a decent goal as well earlier on in the season. So I'm sure that if he gets back in, he'll have a chance. I suppose early on for Nuno, he's come in. I remember him saying in his first interview that he'd been up at 4 o'clock in the morning watching videos of Forest matches. So that shows how much he's still finding to learn about the players that he's got available. I mean, he's now got to change it around because so many players are away at AFCON. So that'll inevitably mean others get an opportunity anyway. And I guess he'll settle down eventually to a set 11, really. But yeah, Mangala probably has every right to feel perhaps a little bit disappointed having started the season so well. But that's what happens with a new manager, isn't it? A new manager comes in and it's clean slate. Doesn't matter what you've done before, which is an advantage for those that weren't playing, but a disadvantage for those that were if they were playing well. So it's just, names up in the air. Let's try a few of them and we'll go from there. And you don't know what's been going on behind the scenes. How have others been doing in training? If others have been doing better in training, then they get the nod, and that, regardless of what they've done before Nuno took over, that would have to be the right way to do it, wouldn't it? Really?
Yeah, I think it's perhaps the most interesting area of the pitch, because, like you say, if you're going to do that Ben Watson split the centre halves thing, then perhaps Sangare is the man who's going to do that. So is it Danilo versus Mangala for that other spot? Because it's interesting, like Danilo, he was really good against Man U, but then he wasn't so good against Blackpool. I think he's feeling for that consistency. So it is a good debate. And then where do you fit in Dominguez? With can you play two wingers in some games? Obviously you can. Ilanga's an injury out now as well. So there's a lot of questions. I mean, have you got any caution coming out of the Blackpool game around the AFCON absentees and the squad looking a bit stretched inevitably, or are you confident that they'll go to Brentford and they'll be all right?
The AFCON absentees is interesting. I think largely for the centre of defence, because you lose Bolly and Niakate. Joe Worrell goes in there. You think about what we're talking about at the end of December as to who might go in January, because Nuno wants a smaller squad, right? So he goes, okay, well, I want a smaller squad. So who might we offload? At that point, you're thinking maybe Joe Worrell will go on loan. Maybe Scott McKenna might leave. Maybe Andrew Omobamidele might go. But if Omobamidele plays for Forest at any point, then he's played for Norwich and Forest, so that stops that happening. So you kind of think, well, maybe he's not going to play Omobamidele then. But if he's going to need Worrell until who knows when, kind of a little bit earlier in February, if those countries do well at AFCON, then he's not going to want to let Worrell potentially or McKenna go at that point. So he's going to have no defenders left. So this kind of AFCON going over into February is a little bit of a mess for Forest in terms of their numbers, trying to reduce the size of the squad, but also not leave them without anybody for a few games potentially, because that'd be a disaster. So I think it gives them an interesting dilemma, particularly in the centre of defence. I mean, at right back, we know they can cover. All right, they haven't got Aina and Oria having gone off to AFCON, but right back's not really an issue. Centre of midfield, they can sort of. Kayate's not really been a starter anyway. Sangare, but they've got others. I think it gives others that opportunity to try and prove that they should be in there longer term. I just think the centre of defence leaves them a bit of an issue. And if they want to sign anybody else, then suddenly they run the risk by the middle of February of having this absolute huge number of central defenders that they don't quite know what to do with, which at a time when Nuno's trying to reduce the squad is kind of counterproductive. So I think this month's really interesting in terms of player departures, because you're wanting to improve the squad in certain areas, wanting to sign players, reduce the squad, but not leave yourself completely exposed in certain positions because of those that are away at AFCON, because that could be dangerous for a few games.
Yeah, Omobamidele is an interesting one because he was on the bench against Blackpool. So if he come on, that kind of sealed it. So he must sort of be in the thinking. So yeah, I'll be curious to see what happens with him and Worrell. Sort of leads into my other question around, do you see benefits in the Blackpool game at all? Because on paper, it's a game you don't want. But on the other hand, you don't want to go up there, I'm sure, on a cold night. But you get another game out of the Codimos potentially, because that didn't answer any questions on Sunday. Probably posed more questions, if anything. And maybe you get another game out of Worrell, who looked rusty, to tune him up a bit more for Brentford. Are there any fringe benefits around having an extra game, do you think?
I mean, I think you're trying very hard to find some there, Matt, aren't you, really?
I am, for your take, yeah.
Yeah. Somebody messaged on our Facebook page actually after the game at the weekend. He said, it's all right for you. You get to go and have a little jolly in Blackpool. And I thought, I'm not quite sure the Lancashire coast in the middle of January can be classed as a jolly. I mean, I know we might go and get some fish and chips. I think that's about the only advantage I can think to going to Blackpool at that point. I mean, look, the players had got a break planned. They were, the plan was to have a few days at St George's Park, work really hard, and then have a little bit of a break. And I think certainly for players like Gibbs-White, I think that would have been important, because playing all summer with the under-21s and then starting the season didn't look as fresh at the start of the season. And then you think he's played a lot of games, and maybe just having a couple of weeks off might have just given him that freshness to kind of kick on for the rest of the season. Instead, we've now got a replay up in Blackpool. Let's hope they don't fly this time after all the stress around that last time. And then, potentially even a fourth round game. And actually, in the end, they've had zero benefits at all to this proposed Premier League mid-season break, because it would just become nothing. And I know there'll be people kind of screaming at us now, saying like, what do they need a break for, and so on. And yeah, fine, I get that. But if you're thinking of wanting to get the best out of certain players, then I think being able to rest for a couple of weeks those who played pretty much all the way through last summer and into now, get the best out of them for the final push into the season, I think that would have been good. I think Nuno probably would have liked that, just give them a bit of a rest, come back fresh again. I think he would have wanted that. So I'm struggling to see many advantages. I suppose it'd be interesting to see what team he picks for that. Is he going to go as strong again to go and try and win it? Or do you look at it now and say, well, I still want to rest players, so let's put in a few of those kids who were on the bench for that Blackpool game and say, play a few of those and go, look, you try and take the opportunity. He likes the FA Cup. Nuno did well in it, of course. Almost got to the final a few years ago with Wolves, and they conceded a stoppage time penalty to Watford and then ended up losing that game. So we know he likes the FA Cup. Grew up watching it in Portugal. Big fan, genuinely big fan of the competition. And you could tell by the team that he picked for the game that he sees this as important and wants to win it and expects to win that game and go through. But now you've got a replay. And you've got players away at AFCON, and you don't want to go up there and get injuries. And the only reward out of it is yet another game this month. It all starts to become a bit less appealing when what you're trying ultimately to do is have your players fresh for a final few months of the Premier League season. Nuno wouldn't say that. I'm sure Nuno would massively disagree with me and just say that the FA Cup is important and they want to go there and win, and the momentum will help, and a good cup run is what they want. And I'm all for that, because I love cup competitions, and I'm old fashioned. I love the FA Cup, but just at this little moment, I can't help but just think it's kind of a draw was just the worst possible scenario from that game, to be honest.
I do wonder if the plan on Sunday was get comfortably ahead with that team on paper, maybe bring Aguilera on for Gibbs-White, a Saparos on for Chris Wood, because if Chris Wood gets injured, I'm tempting fate here, and I shouldn't, but it does look a bit thin on the ground now, because Origi missed that game with injury, didn't he? And obviously Taiwo's out. So yeah, I do. It would be interesting to see one of the kids get a game, maybe up front, and see what they can do. And we're so short of wingers as well. It's funny how Forest, it feels like it's going really well. Like we beat Man United, everything's great, and now I look at it and think, oh, we've got no players from AFCON and we've got no wingers.
It's also funny, isn't it, that we're talking about Nuno wanting to reduce the size of the squad. And we're saying we've got this squad, we need to reduce numbers. And then you look through some positions and you go, well, you want to sign somebody there and you want to sign somebody there. And actually we're a bit short of people there. So they're just a bit bloated in certain areas. And there's probably just some players around who aren't going to be involved and who you kind of want to offload. But I think to get to the squad that Nuno wants, which is a smaller squad, but with more genuine options in certain areas, is going to take more than this window. So I think this window is just about making sure they've got the players that they need to get through to the end of the season. And then then reassess and try and get a squad ready to be more competitive next season, I suppose.
I was all for let's ship out 10 players this window, but I don't, like you said, I don't think we can, because you've got to resolve the goalkeeping situation. I mean, there are players like Ethan Horvath who you could see getting a move, and Scott McKenna, just to get him in the Scotland Euro squad, I can see going. But then players like Aurier and Kouyaté, who are away at AFCON, are they realistically going to go now? Well, probably not this, but they're probably will in the summer because their contracts are up. So I mean, it's all pointing towards another summer of massive turnover, as is the Forest way. I mean, are you worried? What's your take on the FFP thing? Is it one we just have to wait for until next week and just see what comes out? Because it feels like there's a lot of conjecture around it, but we don't really know anything official.
Well, yeah, it's impossible to know exactly because I haven't got the numbers all in front of me. But we can safely say that I think it's going to be close as to whether they've made it or not. And then comes the question of, well, if they're close, then what about the Brennan Johnson sale? So if they're close for those numbers that they have to reach, Forest potentially have an argument which it is within the rules, but the rules are a little bit wishy-washy. I'm no expert on this, but from what I've read, it seems a little bit, well, you can kind of take it either way. So what they could argue in theory is if their numbers don't add up, they could just say, well, look, we could have sold Brennan Johnson earlier in the summer and got 30 million. Instead, we waited a few months and got over 40 million. So the thing about FFP, the FFP rule shouldn't be there to trip teams up. FFP is about profit and sustainability. It's about making sure that clubs don't go bust. It's just about making sure that clubs are bringing in the money to be able to afford to spend it. So in that sense, Forest can say, well, look, if we'd have sold him earlier, we'd have less money. That'd make us less sustainable. So we've waited. Now, if they've had those conversations with the Premier League as they've gone, then that should work as an argument. If they've said, look, we're going to wait because we can get more money, and then they have waited and they've got more money, then that argument should stand. The other side of that argument is, yeah, they've waited and they've got more money for Brennan Johnson, but in the meantime, they've also gone and spent a load more money. But that money on Sangare and all the other players they signed around deadline day, 10, 11 million from Obamidele, all the rest of it, that has to kind of come into account for the next year's. And then on it goes. But it's so hard for a newly promoted team because a Premier League team can overspend by 35 million. Championship teams can overspend by 14 million, I think, something like
13,
that. 13 million. So because it's over a 3-year period, then once you're in the Premier League, you can't suddenly overspend by 105 and catch up with the other Premier League teams. You can only overspend by 35 plus 2 lots of 13. So your spending is less. It's so hard. You go up into the Premier League and Forest have tried to have a go and they've spent lots of money on lots of new players, but it's hard to then catch up with those teams who've been in the Premier League for a few years, or indeed those like Fulham who'd come down and gone up because they've got 2 years of being allowed to overspend by 35. It's all just so complicated, but I suspect it'll be close. And I think they've got arguments should they want to use them, should they need to use them, and we'll see what happens there. But yeah, I mean, FFP, you need a degree in accounting to be able to go through it all and work out the exact details. And I certainly haven't done that. But yeah, there are those things that I understand is where the situation is at the moment, and we'll just wait for the exact details on the 16th, I think it is, isn't it?
15th or 16th. Yeah, I mean the field is really set against the team that gets promoted without parachute payments, which is pretty rare these days now. Because at least if you've got parachute payments, you've had you've had the Premier League money, you've had the parachute. Obviously, Forest never had that. So yeah, I mean fair play to them for going for it, and then we just have to wait and see if they've gone for it too much. But that's another bridge to cross. how are you feeling about relegation, regardless of a potential points deduction? It feels to me like this Brentford game is very big.
Yeah, I think relegation. I don't know. I mean, on the one hand, people just say, well, those three at the bottom are just hopeless. Don't worry about it. But, you know, Sheffield United have got a new manager. Luton aren't getting battered, are they? Luton keep worrying you by taking the lead in big games, and then they don't often come out of it with a lot, although they won a couple of games over Christmas. But, you know, you'd think that if Luton get a couple of injuries, you know, Ross Barkley, Andros Townsend, they've got, you know, if they suddenly lose a couple of players, they're going to struggle. But then we kept saying that about Leicester when they won the league. People just kept saying, well, you know, if they lose Vardy, then they're not going to win the league, are they? But they never did. And Luton's spirit and that horrible ground that, you know, that they have a huge benefit in having, it's doing them good. And I think it's... At the start of the season, I thought they'll start off okay and they'll get some spirited results and then they'll fade off. And I still sort of expect, my brain tells me that's what's going to happen, but at the same time, there's a little niggling bit that says they're not going to go easily. So I think there's going to be a fight on. I think Forest will be okay. I think they should be okay. You know, yes, they're conceding too many soft goals, but they're also starting to score some more as well. And I know what you said about Chris Wood being injured, but who knows when Taiwo Wani's going to be back? I don't know. Maybe it'll be in the next few weeks. And if so, then that'll be very welcome. Not sure how long they'll be missing Elanga. Hudson-Odoi, I thought looked okay. Should have scored at least one against Blackpool, but Gibbs White's now got a couple of goals. Dominguez in the goals. So we're starting to find a few goals around the team. That's going to have to continue for the rest of the season. We can't just be as reliant as they were on a 1 year at the end of last season and the start of this, when he scored, what was it, 6-7 goals in a row for the team. Nobody else has scored, I don't think, in the entire time. You know, you can't carry on like that. So there's enough signs, I think, that they should be okay, I think. And I know what you mean about the next game. Yeah, that I get that. I worry too much about kind of putting too much importance on any one game, because we did that with Bournemouth. Because you think, well, Newcastle away and Manchester United at home, what points are they going to get from that? And then they're going to lose to Bournemouth and beat those two. So I sort of think, you know, that we shouldn't perhaps place too much importance on that one match, because they may, who knows, they might go and lose that and then beat Arsenal at home and surprise us all. Yeah,
I think it feels big to me. Not so much for Forest's result, although obviously that is the prime factor. But if Forest go there and win, then Brentford are really getting sucked into it. Ivan Toney's back, but I mean, they're going to do well to keep him, I think, if the money comes in, because Brentford always sell if the money's right, and eventually, you know, Arsenal need a striker, Spurs maybe need a striker, Chelsea will always buy anyone. So if Forest can go there and win, it could just, you know, hoover them in a bit more. Palace have got Arsenal this weekend. Feels like for Forest, these two wins, they've dragged other teams into them, and Everton, maybe that bubbles burst a little bit, I guess, is what I'm thinking.
Yeah, well, they sort of had that time, didn't they, where they got their points deduction, won a few games, and everyone said, oh, they're going to be absolutely fine. And then suddenly they went and lost a few, and suddenly they're dragged right back into it after having had that big boost, and Sean Dyche's kind of rallying the troops after the points deduction. So, yeah, they may well end up being down there. But, I mean, it's still early. Nuno's only just kind of got a bit of an initial boost from the players at the moment, but you know, several months for him to implement his ideas, and who knows what squad we'll have by the end of January. At the moment, I would say it's not at the front of my mind that Forest might go down this year. I think, like, you know, I think last year it was always kind of very much there in your mind, I think, wasn't it, that they might. I don't think it is quite at the moment. It would take, I think, you know, and that's silly, because actually they could easily have dropped into the relegation zone, you know, the last couple of games. But I think at the moment, under a new manager, given what we've seen, it doesn't feel like at the moment that's occupying my mind that it's going to be a relegation season. Maybe that's naive. I don't know. It just feels at the moment like they should have enough. I think they've found a way to be scoring goals now. Injury or two might change that, and results for other teams might change that view, I suppose. But I don't know. I don't feel like it's. Does it for you? Does it feel like a?
It's only at the back of my mind because we've still got to go to Kenilworth Road, Bramall Lane, and Turf Moor, and if those results were to go negatively, which touch wood they wouldn't, obviously, then that does drag you back in. We've still got Everton away as well, haven't we, and Brentford away, obviously. So yeah, there's a lot of away games where you could come unstuck, but we look better away
fans,
now.
Though, we're all guilty of this. Is that we know our own team's weaknesses a lot.
Yeah.
But you forget that other teams have got those same things. Do you know what I mean? So you sort of think, well, it's Manchester United. It's Manchester United. You know, we're not going to be able to beat Manchester United. And then they play the game and you go, oh yeah, actually they're a bit pedestrian and a lot of them look a bit uninterested. And just like the Man U fans that we know had told us they were, and then Forest can go and beat them. So I think we're always a bit guilty of focusing a bit too much on the negative side of our own team. Whereas if you actually look at what else there is around in the Premier League and in the bottom half of the Premier League in particular, there's a lot of teams with similar kinds of issues or different issues, but issues nonetheless. So I don't know. I would, like I said, I don't think it's necessarily at the forefront of my mind. I think under a new and very good head coach, having found a way to score goals, I sort of think they'll be okay at the moment. So I think they'll be all right.
Yeah, I think that reflects my personality. Greg always says I'm too glass half empty. Paul Franks used to say that to me, the Nottingham cricket coach as well. You always see the negative, not on purpose, but yeah. Right, we shall basically leave it there. If you've enjoyed this, do us a favour and like and subscribe. Very much appreciated with all the iTunes reviews, etc., and obviously on YouTube as well. David, give us a mention for your podcasts and anything else you've got going on to that people can catch you on.
Yes, well, our latest Shut Up and Show More Football will be out later today. I spoke to Harry Toffolo last week. You might have seen the club website put something out that he's become an ambassador for the Community Trust Tricky Hub, so helping people talk about the mental health. So I went down there and recorded about 15 minutes with him talking about that, and also talking about this summer when he found out that he'd breached the FA's betting rules when he was younger, and he said he got sent an Excel spreadsheet with all of the bets that he'd placed out, or several hundred of them, and just said he didn't recognize the bets, didn't recognize himself in them, broke down, had a panic attack. His parents came around to help him. It's a really open, revealing interview about the effect that had on him this summer, and the stress around waiting to find out if he was going to face a 10-month ban that was potentially career ending, or whether he'd have this suspended ban, which is what ultimately happened. And he talks about how grateful he is to the panel for listening to him about that. And that meant he's been able to get his career back on track. And that came just as the 25-man squad was announced. I think it might even been the same day. And he talks about the build-up to that and the stress around that, and the mental health struggles that he had as a kid and then as a teenager when he moved away from home at 15 to go and play football. So it's really open. It's really revealing. I'd encourage you to have a listen. We'll post it out on our socials later, or you can find it on BBC Sounds. So Shut Up and Show More Football is the name of that podcast. And yeah, you can find that Harry Toffolo interview later today.
He does seem like just a really good bloke who absolutely loves playing for Forest and playing in the Premier League. Like one of those players who perhaps thought he wouldn't get there. Like when I went to Wolves and he scored, and I was level with the header and he ran over, and you could see like the raw emotion and what it meant to him. So he's one of those players you root for, even regardless of the story you mentioned there.
I think you're right. I think the other thing that Wolves game, I remember looking at the anguish in his face at missing that late one, and Nico Williams, the anguish in his face as well. I think it was against Spurs when he had a shot that deflected just wide, and you could just see this pain in his face because they so desperately want to succeed. So I absolutely agree with you. It obviously means a lot to him to be playing for Forest, and you can hear that you can hear that, I think, in the interview. I fully agree with you. I think it was a big move for him to get to step up and play in the Premier League, and to find that it might all just be taken off him for, as he said, nobody's fault but his own. That was a really stressful time. So I think he's thrilled to get a second chance now, and hopefully he'll go on and take it.
Do check that out, and then we'll be back here certainly on Friday evening, I think, with Greg and Emily with a Q&A, and then either tomorrow or Saturday with a former Forest player that I'm recording after this, but I never say the name anymore in case it falls through. I feel like I jinxed myself. But it's a former Forest player who's not been on before, so I'll be recording this at 2:00 today, and then that will come out either Thursday or Saturday. We'll see how the land lies in my head when I actually start to plan things better. But yeah, do check all that out. And if you enjoyed this, do like and subscribe, as I say. David, thank you very much. Hope you enjoyed that.
Thank you. Yeah, always. Good to see you.
Yes, you too. You too. Keep up the good work on Radio Nottingham with the team there. Have a good day, everyone. And we shall be back, as I say, tomorrow or Friday when I work out things much better. In the meantime, though, we shall see you soon.